It's over at 10 o'clock, so we will get started if that's okay. Just before we do the meeting, just wanted to welcome Steve from the Improvement Board, who was in the paper later. Thanks, Steve, for coming along. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No, we don't.
No? A rare occurrence. Declarations of interest?
Can I declare an interest, a purely interest in items number 5 and item number 7, the budget, and I will leave the room during that discussion.
Item 9, is that?
Item 9?
Yeah.
Item 5 and item 9,
yeah. Okay, no problem, thanks, Mark.
What did I say? 7? Oh, 7.
Sorry, Chris.
Declare a non-pecuniary interest in items 5 and 9.
Any others? No? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. I'm sure everybody's probably seen that the minutes from the previous meeting that were approving on January 25 and January 26. Has anyone got any spelling mistakes? Full stop missed out? No? People have to approve the minutes? Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there aren't any matters arising I'm not aware of anyway, so we'll move on. I don't have anything to add to my mayoral update. So unless everybody's got any specific questions for me, we can move on to item 5. Yes, that is, if you don't mind, Pam, thank you. Thank you. So item 5, we'll take the paper largely as read, but I thought it was just worth saying that hopefully it's self-explanatory. Happy to answer any questions or receive any comments from Cabinet. But I suppose just to put on record in the meeting that now, given various changes that are pointed out in the paper, it seems like an appropriate time to carry out a review. So I will be, through officers of the Combined Authority, reaching out to various organisations, including both development corporations, councils and other stakeholders to get their feedback on what they think the best form of moving forward is and why any particular or group of organisations might be best placed to be able to achieve the outcomes that we all want. But like I said, I think the report itself is pretty self-explanatory, but beyond that I didn't have anything else to add, so I don't know if anybody's got any comments or questions they have for item 5. No? Okay, so we'll note that report if that's okay, everybody. Can I just use the chairs being put back in? And then we'll move on to item 6, the public code of conduct. Jeanette, are you picking that up? Yeah. Just put that upwards, I should turn it on. If you move it slightly closer, thank you.
Thank you. So, members of Cabinet previously considered this report on the 12th of December, but requested that the Audit and Governance Committee considered it. They did so on the 20th of February, so they made no amendments. So it's here for you. The recommendations are to note that the Audit and Governance Committee met on the 20th of February and was supportive of the Cabinet decision on the 12th of December. And B, to note that the Public Code of Conduct included at Appendix A will now be included in the Constitution and implemented, subject to Cabinet's decision today. Thank you.
Anybody have any additional comments that they want to make or any questions that they have on item 6? People happy to know the paper? So thank you very much. And then moving on to item 7, the Organisation Improvement Plan Progress. This is for you, is it Tom?
So Sarah will actually pick up the report itself. I suppose it was just I wanted to flag that I prepared a self-reflective review a few weeks back, which I shared with Cabinet, I shared with the team at MXLG, and I shared with Steve and the board, which was just my reflections on the progress we've made and the work we still need to do. And obviously this report today is our latest update on the progress against the action plan. So I'll pass over to Sarah.
Thanks, Tom. I suppose I don't really have much else to add to that, just to ask just to draw your attention to the recommendations, which is to kind of note and provide feedback on the presentational changes to the Organisation Improvement Action Plan, which we did partly as a result of some feedback that we had on the 12th of December Cabinet. And as Tom says, to kind of note the progress that we've made up to this present day. I'm happy to take questions.
Any comments or questions? Chris?
So, me and Sarah have spoken outside of this process, but I just wanted to make quite clear, one of the things that I've put forward is I think that there should be an approval process for variations on timeframes. So should it be a case that something doesn't meet a timescale, that we then have the ability to be able to approve and question why it hasn't met the timescale. So going forward, I believe that Sarah's going to include people, but I think that's probably one of the things that we need to change. And that's all.
I suspect Cabinet are happy with that. That any timelines that comes to Cabinet for discussion as to why, and then put amendments to that timeline. Yeah. Thanks for that, Chris. Anything else? People happy to note the report? Thank you very much. And then swiftly then on to item 8. So is this over to you then, Steve, please? Welcome again.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I give you...
You might also just need to flick the switch up at the back. It is turned on, but at the top, just flip that up and then hopefully that'll help.
Right.
Thank you.
Can I give you Rob's apologies? He's very sorry. So you had to make do with me. I'm not going to speak at very much length. You've had the paper. I'm conscious that this is an ongoing conversation. This is the first of these quarterly reports that we brought here, and we're more than happy to have feedback on that. The board's role is to oversee your response to the best value notice. Your improvement plan is critical to that, and I think as we've gone along, what's become clear is it is quite a complex plan, lots of interrelated aspects. What the board seeks to do is to offer challenge across the aspects of the plan, and we hope support as you go forward. The work that is being done is important for the region, but we know, because we're all from local government, that if the decision making gets bogged down, however important those decisions are, that's a distraction, that's not helpful. And what hopefully you're doing, and we've just been talking about some aspects of that, you're getting that right into the future. In the months that the IAB have been working, we have seen by both officers, by cabinet members, and I should be clear that that's officers here, but also officers in the boroughs, but it is quite early days. And one of the things that we believe that the authors of the best value notice, which isn't us, it's the department, will want to be reassured on is that the changes which are being made will be embedded. And where problems are identified, they will need to be resolved. And that, again, is going to take time. And it has only been a few months so far. What is clear to us is the way that you as a cabinet are working has changed, and you're working together. Nobody's saying that you're there yet, but very significant changes in approach have been made. The transparency needed for decision making is becoming the norm, and there's a clear wish for you all to be working together. As I say, you have the paper. I don't intend to go through it. Not least, I recognise the length of your agenda and the significance of some of those items that I'm sure you're keen to get onto. But I am happy to answer questions as best I can. I would just finish by saying that you're on a journey and have already made progress, but there is more to be done. And perhaps one of the, it sounds easy to say, but actually it's quite difficult to do, is being clear about what good looks like, and also that it is something that is sustainable. We hope that we will be able to help you further on that journey, but that's where we are for now.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. And to put on record my thanks to you and Rob and the rest of the improvement board. The work that you've done with us so far, that mirror that you've held up has been a very helpful one. And I'll let cabinet members speak for themselves, but I think you'll have seen as well that we are keen to continue that engagement on a voluntary basis. You know, it's not something we're trying to just kind of deal with as a process. And I think I would accept and reflect what you said, that we've made vast improvements, but there's always more improvements that one can make. So keen to continue on that journey. So yeah, thanks to you and the improvement board for doing that. Has anybody got any comments or questions on this item, or Steve? Alan?
Yeah, certainly, Ben. I'll echo them comments in terms of the cabinet, and we're vast improved and certainly working together in a lot more transparent way. My questions are based around what the advisory board, whether they've had a conversation to discuss the development corporations, and that it seems to be that the you know, it's changing that situation rapidly over the last couple of months and stuff, where Ben's reviewing whether or not the effectiveness of them over the short term. Does the board have a view on how that may impact the best value notice at all?
Clearly, the development corporations are a significant part of the work of the combined authority. We have had conversations about them. There are some quite complex interrelationships that we're clear need to be understood. And I'm not saying we understand them, but they are there. I think we wouldn't express a view on whether they were the right answer.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's more the optics.
But yeah, exactly. So without going into too much detail, it is clear that in at least one case there were misunderstandings between the two bodies, and that hope has now been cleared up. But it is making sure that that kind of thing cannot happen in the future.
Thanks, Alec. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you, Steve, for that. Thanks to the board, and yeah, look forward to continuing to work with you. So we'll note that item, and then we'll move on to item 9. It's over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much. So obviously this is...
Sorry. I'll keep you right back, thank you.
It's got more time out, isn't it?
Thanks, Joe, sorry about that.
So I wasn't intending to go into too much detail. Obviously it's quite a big report, but we've done a lot of discussion and consultation at different workshops. I think you were going to say something, Tom.
Yeah, I suppose just to say, obviously this is the culmination in a huge amount of work over many months, going right back, I think, to the first workshop we had with Cabinet. So this is obviously the final budget. I just wanted, I think, put on record thanks to Joe and the finance team, because it's been a Herculean effort to get us to this point. Also thanks to Chris as the portfolio holder, who's committed a lot of time to work with Joe to really make sure the process has been robust. And also thanks, Ian's not here, but thanks to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who again met, I think, a couple of weeks back and had a really detailed session as part of the consultation. So that's got us to this point, really, just to set the scene.
Thank you. So I think, you know, the most important thing is what's happened since the draft budget. We had the public consultation. The responses to the public consultation are Appendix 2. Some of those have come through as public questions as well, which we will respond to in due course. I suppose the overriding good position is that overall we've got a positive position at the end of this year. We've got an overall surplus of 2.983 million going into 26-27, so to the budget. We're going to be transferring just over £1 million of that to the police reserve, creating a new mayoral cost reserve, mayoral election cost reserve of 0.5 million. And we're also, that's what wasn't right, wasn't it? 500k. Sometimes I've got M's and K's and I get confused. So it's 0.5 million, and we're putting 1.45 million into the general devolution fund reserve. So overall, in terms of setting the balance budget for next year, we're in a relatively good position. There's I think it's table 9, shows the reconciliation from the draft budget. I think it's page, I'm not sure what page it is in the pack, apologies, but it's table 9 in the report. That shows you what the movements have been since the draft budget was presented to you in January. And I guess the two most significant things are we had some extra mayoral capacity funding, just over 700,000, 750,000, and we've also now, as a result of the MRP policy, which is attached to the Treasury Management Strategy, we've now providing for MRP on the airport loans. So that's the sort of probably two most significant changes since the draft budget report. I think the other thing just to bring to everybody's attention, I suppose, is the reserves. That's table 19. So if you look at the end of March 27, we're forecast to have unring fenced. So these are reserves that have been set aside as a sort of either general contingency or specific reserves, specific risks, and they're going to be just over 17 million. So in terms of the overall financial position, I think it's a fairly good position for the authority, quite a stable position for the authority, but it does have risks within there, and those risks are set out within the final report, as they're also covered off in my section 25 statement, which is, I think, appendix 6 in the report. So I wasn't intending to say any more than that, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, John. I'm just disappointed the extra 700,000 for the mayoral capacity fund doesn't come to the mayor's office. But we've had that conversation afterwards. No, that's a bad joke for anybody that might take that seriously. I'll open it up to any comments or questions that people might have. Chris, I suppose, is there anything you want to add just because of the work that you've done? And again, echoing what Tom said, you've been fantastic in working with Joe and the team on this. Do you want to make any points?
If it's okay, I'd probably like to just cover off some of the public questions under themes, if that's okay.
Sure, if you want to.
So there's been questions about the HDC and the MDCs and how their budgets will affect this budget, because there is obviously income sort of going both ways related to that. And as the budgets are set for the development corporations and as decisions are made about the review, that will obviously be taken into account. There's some questions relating to the airport loans being regarded as income. That's not, it's just a case that we're now setting out a provision to make sure that we cover it off. There's been questions about the transformation costs. So there's a budget which I specifically requested of 1.5 million for transformation and improvement, because it is not a spend, it's a budget, because essentially what we have at the minute is we've been trying to cover the costs of interims or external advice via savings, whereas actually we should set forward a budget to make sure that we cover costs and that we have an appropriate venue to charge those costs to. There was questions about the general fund reserve and the million not being sufficient. That's been increased, but it's very, very clear throughout the positions that have been set out in the reserves that there is an attempt to make sure that risks are covered with individual reserves rather than reliance on the general fund reserve as a whole. There was questions about the principal amount to STDC, and there has been a reduction in that amount, and the amount is reduced to 108 million from 111. I think that's probably the majority of the questions. I think obviously the report is laden with risk, but one of the things that I have requested, and I've spoken to Tom about this morning as well, is about getting a full cash flow report to actually understand all of the cash flow across all of the entities, so that we're able to make good decision making. Because I'm quite concerned that we need to be able to understand if there is a need in the future to write off any historic debt, then we need to be able to properly assess that against income.
Excellent, very helpful, Chris, thank you. Was anyone else? Stephen? I'm sorry, you were doing the application.
Thank you.
Just flip that upwards.
Yeah, is that on? Yeah. Just picking up on what Chris said at the end there in terms of risk. Firstly, just to acknowledge that from my perspective the report's much easier to read, much more understandable, and thanks to Joe and the team for doing that. Paragraph 201 lists all the key financial risks. It is a very long list of risks, and some of them are quite substantial. I'm not sure to what extent yet we fully understand what would be required if some of those came to fruition, because some of them are, as I said, substantial risks, and it is a very long list. So I think some surety and potentially further work to understand what consequences might be and what we may need to do should some of those come to fruition.
propose to pick that up, and seems like a sensible piece of work to take forward. Lisa?
Yeah, my colleagues will know that at probably about 3:45 I had my thoughts this morning and sent them round, but just want to place on record my thanks to Joe. I'm criticised in my own authority for not understanding the budget, but you've made it really helpful and clearer in the way that you've presented this. But just like when I sit here as an overarching member of one authority, which is the Tees Valley Combined Authority. However, I'm fully supportive of what we're doing in driving economic growth across the region, and I recognise the significant challenges that we currently face in the retail sector. But at the same time, I have a duty to ensure that public funding is used prudently, transparently, and in a way that delivers the best possible value for the region. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me on that. But it's vital that the additional investment requested today from HDC, and I have spoke to my colleagues from Hartlepool about this, it's no surprise for them. I want it to be strictly a one-off allocation. My worry, I suppose, going forward, Joe, is that the same ask will be asked for next year. So what I would like, and I mentioned this before, is a sustainable long-term business plan for HDC that is self-financed and does not create any ongoing reliance on taxpayers' money. I'm sure you can probably understand that. I also welcome the improvement in the reserves position, which you've said, but it rightly recommends the establishment of both financial resilience reserve, which I know is in your plan there, but also a transformation reserve. But having a robust level of reserves is fundamental, isn't it? And I say this in my own authority. But given this, it does propose to allocate 1 million of our reserves to HDC. And my question to you is, what progress are we making on our wider improvement journey with reserves? And bearing in mind that 1 million will go over to them, is that sustainable, and will it be a one-off, or will it be required in future years?
I think that's probably more.
If I just pick up that last point, Joe, and I'll let you talk about the general reserves point. Just to be clear from a process point of view, if Cabinet were minded to approve the £1 million, on that subject, as detailed in the recommendation, to all of the internal assurance framework that we have within TVC, including a business case that would be reported back to Cabinet that would have to satisfy the requirements of our business case for value for money, etc. So even if there's an allocation, it can't be spent until there is a satisfactory business case in place. So even the allocation of £1 million, there are additional safeguards beyond this approval that obviously Cabinet will be continually updated on and made aware of before that is spent, even today. And from a process point of view, there is no additional financial allocation to Hartlepool Development Corporation from TBCA unless the Cabinet decides for a further allocation. So as of today, it cannot happen without the agreement of Cabinet going forward. So I only say that from a process point of view. I suppose from my personal point of view around what's going to prevent this happening again, in theory, it wouldn't stop a request from HDC asking for more money in the future, which is, I think, the substance of your point, isn't it, Lisa? And I think it's fair to say you and I are absolutely in agreement on this, that this is a single payment to allow Hartlepool to deliver on some of the transformational schemes that the council are delivering and working extremely hard on, and will be fantastic for the town. And on the basis that they deliver that, fantastic. If they don't, my position is I don't think there should be any more redress back to the combined authority for additional funding. Now again, if a request came in, the Development Corporation, in the same way that anybody could, in theory, make a request to the combined authority, that would still have to come back here for discussion and reach an agreement. But I think we're definitely on the same page as to the principle that that can't happen. And I think it's fair to say that the council and the Development Corporation are on with the business plan anyway as we speak, and we're hoping to have that done in the not too distant future. So all of those things will be reported back to Cabinet. So that's more the general fluff bit, but I don't know, Joe, if there's anything specific on the financial reserve point that Lisa made.
No, and I think reserves and the sufficiency of reserves, and I've covered it off in section 5 statement to some extent, but the sufficiency of reserve, it is linked to the specific risk that you're facing as an organisation. And I think as we do more work on strengthening our oversight of risk and those strategic risks, things may become more evident that we need more or less reserves. I think holding reserves as well isn't necessarily a good thing, because you're tying up cash that you're not using then for service delivery. So there is a balance to be maintained between having sufficient reserves and having too much reserves. So you don't want to hold too much cash because you could be spending that money. So I think it's a balance. I think In terms of what we've done on reserves, we've certainly done a root and branch review of reserves, and I've worked with colleagues around the table looking at historic reserves. Do we still need those? What were they for? So that whole root and branch review of reserves has happened. We've still got a couple more that we're just sort of fine-tuning on. I think that the purpose of the reserves policy of trying to create these specific reserves is that at least, you know, we know we're doing transformation now. We've got a big organisational improvement plan that Tom's leading on, and you know, Stephen spoke about that today. From the IAB perspective, that is going to require money. So we've put some money in the revenue budget, but we want a little bit more, you know, just in case. But again, any drawdowns, any transfers to and from reserves are always going to be in your in-year quarterly monitoring reports for Cabinet to approve. So that money can't be spent unless you approve it to be spent. I have been asked the question, how have you come up with those numbers and why those amounts? And there is no science to this. There's a little bit of what could we afford to do. I think creating some of these specific reserves as well is about making sure that Cabinet then is really clear we do need some money for that. We potentially need some money for that. The amount that goes in there, I suppose it's a little bit of judgment call on my part, given the level of reserves we've got, with the sort of the likelihood and the impact of the risk that we're facing. Some of the risks are too big, but then the likelihood of us facing it in the imminent is not there. So it's that balance and that judgment call on what's appropriate. But I think at least we have done the root and branch review. We've got a good, stronger position now in terms of the non-ring-fenced reserves. I suppose we'd all want more reserves to do more things to cover every risk if we could, but I think we're at a reasonable balance going into the new financial year.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Lisa. Chris?
I think just to further enforce Lisa's point, I think the business case needs to not only include the project but also the vehicle, because I think if we're agreeing to fund a vehicle, it needs to make sure that we do that. But from what I've heard and what I understand, that's all covered off, because that's really, really important. Because I would hope that in the future, should Middlesbrough set up or have a different vehicle to be able to deliver town centre regeneration, that should be able to put projects forward towards any sort of funds. But without the justification for the vehicle, costs come from here.
That's a fair point, Chris. Yeah, I mean, Pam's not here, but Denise, have you got anything you want to put on record on the Hartlepool side?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
If you just flick the switch at the top, upwards.
Is that better?
That's it, perfect.
Okay, thank you. It's really to do with the loan agreements, and it's really good to see that the interest for goods goes now budgeted for, and that's really helpful. But I think as shareholders in the airport, and it says that TL is a guarantor of some loans, I think we need to actually be cited on the loan agreement, and it does say it's still draft, so, and I think the same for SDDC. I think I know my council would like to actually be cited on the loan agreements before they're signed, to make sure I know we've talked about legal advice about making sure that, you know, where the responsibilities and accountability, but we need to clear that off.
Yeah, please do.
So, in terms of the loans to Gooseball, there is a signed loan agreement. So, just for the record, those agreements are in place, and other loans, further loans from the initial loan agreement are variations to that original loan agreement. So, there is a loan agreement in place for the Gooseball original loan. In terms of the STDC loans, we're at the point now where we're just finalising, because with every loan agreement you have to have a kind of particular schedule, and we're just working through looking at the STDC business plan principal repayments. What we don't want to do is have a schedule that enforces them to make principal repayments at a time when their business rates income is not flowing through, so we need something that is sensible and is then achievable and then that they stick to. So we're planning, I think, was it April, or I think it was April, it's on the board plan for, isn't it? So that is coming back to Cabinet to approve rather than delegate authority down.
It just would be helpful to see the loan agreement, and maybe we've got it, but it was just, and the other thing was, I didn't see any mention of the idea. Because I think there is some legacy money on the ERDF, and I couldn't see anything in the accounts and where that is.
Okay, I'll take that one away and come back to you.
Thank you.
So, I was asking the question, is that the money that's still sat with? Could you just explain that for everybody?
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so the EIDF legacy funds don't sit with the combined authority. We have to apply to CLG with a full business case, and they have to be used for a financial instrument to support businesses. So they won't appear in here because they don't sit with us currently.
Thanks, Sarah. Can we actually have a little briefing note on that, just so I can, I'm just conscious of who my successor will be here in 5 weeks' time, not me, and then I want to make sure that I'm leaving them with the full
Yeah.
facts.
You can do that, can we, Sarah?
Yes, that's no problem.
Brilliant.
Sarah, would that money be devolved between the 5 authorities then, rather than just sat in with yourself?
No, so there's very specific requirements, Alec, which I can add to the briefing note. We can certainly bring that back to a future cabinet. It has to. Those funds were generated from a previous investment fund, and they have to be used to create a new investment fund for businesses.
So could we not in theory create 5 separate ones, parochial to our own authorities, or?
Technically you could, but when you look at the criteria for the business case, I don't know that that would score as strongly as we would need it to be able to draw down the funds, but we need to look at a number of options, and that's a piece of work that we need to do this year. So there's lots of options, but as long as we're delivering a financial instrument which provides direct funding to businesses, and a key criteria is that it also leverages significant private funds. So there's currently 13 million in that EIDF legacy. Now that, yes, it sounds like a lot of money, but in order to create an investment fund of some scale, splitting that 13 million, you would find that difficult to do so, but there's a number of options that we need to work through with Cabinet.
Well, that would lead to the question is why we have 13 million. I know it's not in our bank accounts, but why is the legacy money just sat there? Why have we not utilised it as of yet?
Yeah, I think, so correct me if I'm wrong, but before the first mayoral election, there was a decision taken to put money into a regional investment fund with the rest of the North East.
Right, okay.
And it's been sat there since the end of that programme. And because it's been tied up in that, as Sarah, I think, has rightly said, it has to then be used for those purposes. So I think what's a good idea, Alec, is, I mean, you have a portfolio lead for this, which is quite helpful. It might be worth not just bringing something back to Cabinet, but maybe working with Sarah on what that might look like and how we might access it. And I think then Sarah will help you understand the criteria, because at the end of the day, whether the actual cash sits here or sits in the council, the question will be, is this cash being used across the region effectively? That's what you're going to care about. Absolutely. And if you can work with Sarah to develop something, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Al. Okay, Chris?
Sorry, one last one.
Sorry.
Joe, how are we covering off? Because there was potentially going to be a one-pager to just cover off some of the changes. Is that still happening, or are we doing so like table 16 where the borrowing figures are correct?
Oh, sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
I do apologise, yeah. So I think we... Is it not back on me? Yeah, sorry. I think we covered off the borrowing one. I will come back and correct that if it's wrong, but I think it was because one was closing and one was opening, but I will come back and double check that shortly. I'll come back to you if that is correct and I'll update. Someone was actually looking at that this morning, but I think that's what the issue was. Yeah, sorry, table 16, I should have pointed that out. The capital programme and the funding, the borrowing, there's an error on table 16, so the correct total is, I think, is the 9827, not the 6327 that's at the end. Thank you.
That's
apologies, I didn't have much sleep last night, so I'm a bit not with it.
Chris's portfolio, that's good. Make sure we're all kept right. Okay.
One last one, if you don't mind, Chair.
Sure.
I'm not labouring the point about liabilities, because I know that's been answered 3 times now in terms of the SDDC and won't far back. But we mentioned the loan agreements being in place, ready for April, I think you said, Joe. I just want to try and understand, if the SDDC, I mean, touch wood, that's not going to happen, but, you know, future-proofing it, if they were to default on them loan agreements, what would be due course and process, and how would that impact us at the TBCN?
So there's probably a question for me to come back probably on a more formal briefing, I think, just in terms of consideration. I think in terms of, so we're talking about STDC?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I suppose the advantage at the moment is that currently I sit over both organisations, so I suppose I get the which someone else wouldn't, I get the benefit of being able to see their financial business plan and their model, etc. So obviously it's something we're really keeping a watchful eye over. The STDC board papers will be published today, and actually that's one of the other things I meant to say, and again apologies for this. In the borrowing, again, the 6327 that I referred to, that's the STDC borrowing for 2026-27. That will be updated at Q1 because we've just finalised the STDC budget, so the actual borrowing ask is going to be more than that. It's going to be, well, I won't say figure because it's not out there, but it'll be slightly more than that. The reason I think I don't want it after I've gone to say there's a group budgeting issue, it's not that, it's the timing issue. So at the moment we're formulating all the budgets for STDC, they will be published today, but this afternoon someone might see we've got 6327 in there for STDC and they've got a different number in there, but obviously we couldn't include those numbers until the STDC board have approved those. So once they've approved, then they'll come to us, but that is all wrapped up in their 350 million borrowing facility. Just wanted to be really clear about that. So coming back to the original question though, what we are obviously doing now, whilst I've got that benefit of both, is looking at that financial business plan and looking at their MTFP and making sure there's no problem with them servicing that interest. Obviously, again, I get to see underneath the numbers. I look at the risks that are in there for themselves, let alone our risks. And so at the moment, the way it works quite well is that I've got visibility of that. To answer your question, what would happen? Well, they're not asset backed, so we haven't got loans, we've got security over loans we can call in. But I think all I can say at the moment, there was always going to be significant risk in those early years, but that risk goes away quite sharply as the regeneration scheme. It's a stepped. It's a bit of a risk in the early years, but then that risk comes good. And as long as on that financial business plan, what they've got in there is robust, then I'm kind of fairly relaxed about that. I say fairly relaxed. I mean, I'm relaxed in the sense that they've been able to demonstrate they can meet those interest payments. And in terms of the principal repayments, that will come through in the loan schedules when we bring them back.
And it's the key thing to give everybody reassurance, isn't it, is to get the loan agreements in place. And it shows when capital and interest starts to crank up, and then that will be dovetailed against their financial plans that you said budget's going to be published there.
Yeah, published today.
Chris?
So I think Alex's point is speaking to the reason why I would really appreciate us doing that cash flow work to be able to see across all the entities what that looks like to make sure that everyone feels a level of comfort. I just want to clarify. Line 189 says there's no further financial support proposed for STDC 26-27. Is that still the case because this is already utilising the already agreed money?
Yeah.
It's just that line doesn't quite feel like it says those words.
I think what that line was trying to say was we're asking for £1 million for HDC, but there's no support required for STDC in terms of helping them to balance their budget, not linked to the borrowing that's already been approved.
Okay. Lisa.
Apologies, John, you probably already mentioned this, but I bear with your lack of sleep, because I'm sleep deprived exactly the same. But just about risks and liabilities, I know we've spoken about those, but obviously we've had legal advice about risk and liability for loans, but are these factored into the reserves? So, for example, Alex mentioned STDC there, and I've mentioned HDC, and go back on Denise's point. Where do we sit as authorities, if you like, and TBCA, if those risks come to fruition? Would they be covered by reserves, or would we as constituent authorities be responsible for those?
Do you want to start, Tom?
I think, Tom, you can jump in as well, but very clearly no, the local authorities are absolutely not responsible for any of those liabilities should they materialise. That's all. And again, that's been shared a number of times with the legal advice, but helpful to put on record again that absolutely, if there was worse was to happen and TBCA was to collapse and the development corporation was to collapse and there'd be lots of debt outstanding, it wouldn't fall back on the local authorities.
Would it be covered by reserves? Or how how would we cover those liabilities and risks?
So I think in terms of with SDT, we've already done the borrowing, so the issue would be, could we afford to keep servicing the borrowing if we were not getting the resulting interest receivable? In terms of the principal repayments, as long as they can keep serving as interest, and if they don't want to reduce their debt, then their interest will stay up here because they're not making principal repayments to reduce it. And as long as their revenue budget can afford those interest payments, you can almost leave the debt outstanding. So I think certainly in the early years, as I said, sort of the next 2 to 3 years, it's just that affordability of interest after that. Because they will then have those constant business rate income flows for 20, I think it's 20 years left, isn't it? 25-year deal, I think.
Yeah, for the retention of business rates is for a defined period of time, which says 20 years left.
Right.
But STDC to retain the 50% of rates that would normally not be retained locally.
And at the moment, I said that 20-year business plan indicates that those loans will be able to be repaid in full.
Okay, well, what I was going to plan to do, unless there's anything else, I just think for kind of prudence and transparency purposes, on the paper, can we approve the recommendations and note everything from A to N on the for phonetic alphabet? Mama, yeah, Mama. So we start with that, and we'll just leave N for November. We'll leave that to one side, but let's do A to N for Mama. Are people happy to agree with those recommendations? Yeah. Okay, then separately, just again, I just think it's helpful from a prudency point of view. If we take N, the last recommendation, are people happy to approve the recommendation at item N?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you very much. Thank you for that, Joe, but I think we're coming straight back to you, aren't we, on item 10?
We'll get Pam back on the room.
Oh yeah, let's get Pam back. I keep forgetting about Pam. She's been on holiday, isn't it? That's fine. Thanks, Pam. Right, sorry, over to you, Joe, item 10.
Yeah, I will actually make this one really quick. So this is just the Q3 in-year monitoring report. Again, it is a good news story, which is nice for a change. So overall, we've got a net deficit now of just over £500,000, and that is a positive movement of just over 6 million from the Q2 position. And the question is why that significant movement. If you look at the table on page 4 of the report, table 1, you'll see the main variance is on the release of interest payable. So we've now got an underspend on the interest payable budget, and that's predominantly, we said, if you remember right, at Q2, we thought we were going to have to do some more borrowing. As it happens, because of the way our cash flow work and grant payments, and we've got some slippage on the capital programme. So if you get slippage on the capital programme, we haven't got chunky lumps of cash going out the door. So the actual borrowing need that we identified, which included Q2, was up to 140 million by the end of the year. We only had to do 40 million. So that's why we've got quite significant underspend on the interest payable budget. And then the only other negative movement is we've now provided this year, I talk about it in the Treasury Strategy report, but this year we've provided for MRP again on the airport loans. So that's a new thing that we've now had to update. So other than that, I have to take any questions.
Any questions for Joe? Okay, people happy to note and approve the recommendations? Yeah, thank you very much. So we've gone straight forward that one, Joe. Back to you then on the capital strategy item 11.
Are you going to do this one, John?
Yeah. Wait, that's okay. Oh, give a rest, Joe.
Yeah, give Joe a bit of a rest. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody. So yes, so Prudential Code Capital Finance and Local Authorities requires each combined local authority each year to produce a capital strategy. The capital strategy forms a foundation for good long-term planning, sound, prudent financial management, sound asset management and effective resource planning. So today I'm asking Cabinet to approve the capital strategy for 26-27 at Appendix 1. The two elements I draw your attention to really are at paragraph 4.1, which is our long-term capital programme. Fundamentally, a lot of that is the transport programme, which will come back to under item 15, and hence myself and the infrastructure directorate taking this item. And then in paragraph 4.8, the financing options for that capital programme as well. So yeah, short and sweet from me, I think, at this moment in time, but just seek approval of the capital strategy for this coming year.
Any comments or questions for Jonathan? Chris?
Can I just check what tolerance for slippage has been built into the sort of capital strategy, if any?
At the moment, none, Chris. That reflects the programme that we've got in item 15 in terms of the major capital, the investment programme of transport and the current capital programmes. As we develop the transport programme in particular, we'll look to build tolerance and over programming that as well.
Okay. People have to approve the capital strategy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jonathan. Got away lightly on that one. Joe? Item 12.
Not for me. Thank you. So, as required by law, we are required, alongside the main budget report, we are required to Cabinet is asked to approve a treasury management strategy and a minimum revenue policy for the forthcoming financial year. I think it's quite important for us. The treasury management strategy isn't always an important document for all organisations, but for us, given our amount of borrowing, given our amount of lending, and the significant cash flows that we have coming through the authority, it's quite an important document for us. And so the treasury management strategy, it sets out the approach to what you're going to do with your surplus cash. So if you've got lots of cash on a daily basis, what do you do that? How do you invest it to make sure that it's earning a return, so a return for the public purse? And it also looks at the borrowing, and more importantly, linking it back to the capital strategy. So the two documents should really be read in conjunction. If there's any borrowing required for that capital strategy and that capital investment, then that needs to be read across to the treasury management strategy and the affordability of that borrowing. I think the other thing that's quite important is that, I know we've had probably one of the entities, you do have to approve the authorised limit. So that's the absolute maximum borrowing that officers have authority to borrow up to with your delegation. And then there's an operational boundary that you're being asked to approve. That gives us a little bit of buffer between the authorised limit and the operational boundary. So ordinarily you want to keep below the operational boundary. Occasionally it can go over your borrowing as long as there's plans to bring it back down by the end of the year. So the operational boundary is just a slightly lower limit. So Cabinet, in approving the treasury management strategy, you are specifically approving those two limits. Also, we've got the MRP policy here that's appended to it. So we've done quite a lot of work with advisors on the MRP policy. You'll probably know from previous reports that the external auditor raised matters in relation to MRP not being provided on the loans to STDC and to the airport, and it is a requirement. There are 4 exceptions to that provision. I've taken some advice from Treasury advisors and from SIPFA in this regard, and we're still having conversations and working through them, but I've got a policy there that hopefully is fine for 2026-27. It complies with the law in terms of we have a policy. You'll see for STDC, because of all the reasons we've spoken about earlier, in terms of their cash inflows and the business rates inflows, it is a deferred MRP policy in relation to STDC, and that will be obviously reviewed next year. But that, and you'll see within the policy, it is then aligned with principal repayments as well. Don't have to take any questions.
Okay, any comments or questions? Chris?
Treasury management, I don't think there's anything that I've ever had a question on in council. I don't think I've ever read one as much as I've read this one. Joe, can you just give a bit more detail about the capital programme funding? Because I think it's really important that everyone understands what the TDC are borrowing and the reasons that it's nil across future years. If you can just explain.
So that was the 6327?
Yeah, 6327, but then across future years.
Yeah, so that's what I was just referring to in the terms of the TDC. Sorry, which table is that, Chris?
It doesn't have a number, but it's table 3? Just above 8.6 on page 8.
Above 8.3, did you say?
Above 8.6.
Oh dear. Yeah, table 15 summary.
What was the question though, Chris? Sorry.
Just a bit more explanation about the capital programme funding and the fact that the TVC borrowing is nil for future years.
So that was the issue. So that was the issue. Yeah. So that was the issue. Sorry, it's just that was the issue I was referring to earlier.
Yes.
So that's the
that's likely to change.
Yes, that's the issue I was referring to earlier. So I thought I'd covered that one off. That's why I was a bit. Is it the same query or not? Apologies.
That's fine. Okay. Are people happy to approve the Treasury Management Strategy and the MRP policy? Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Joe, for all that hard work. I know we've got more on the agenda, but I think it is worth putting on record just the amount of work that you and the team have been putting into this across all of the entities for many, many months. So thank you, Joe, for all of your hard work and continued work. It's been a Herculean effort. And also, Chris, to be fair, that the work that you've been putting in working with Joe, it's been really, really useful to have a kind of a critical friend and an independent eye on it. So thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you'll keep doing that work as well. So always worth recognising success where it's deserved. On to item 13, Brownfield Housing Fund. Over to you, Sarah.
Excuse me. Thank you. Just a couple of points before we move to the recommendations. Tees Valley secured an additional just over 6 million of brownfield housing funding that had to be committed within this financial year, but it has a number of years to deliver. We didn't actually receive confirmation from government until October 25 of that funding, and this paper is asking Cabinet to commit to 2 housing projects in Tees Valley, and we will need to contract those fairly quickly. So happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you. Yeah. It wasn't really about the schemes, it was more about the process in terms of when we contract and who we contract, and just making sure that, just put on record that it needs to relate to the procurement strategy and the social value stuff that we're about to talk about in the later items. I think we need to make sure that any of those opportunities benefit as much as our local economies.
Thanks, Pam. And just to provide some assurance, whilst that money won't be spent by this organisation, we do make sure in the contracts that they need to stick to our procurement rules, including social value.
Lisa.
Yeah, I'll speak on this on social value. We've had some great results with employing a social value officer in Stockton. Read the last cabinet papers, they're great, but maybe not to declare an interest, but one of the sites mentioned in the report is opposite where I live, so I welcome the recommendations on this. And Princeton Gardens, it's a site that's like crucial for us in Stockton because it's right in our care and health innovation zone, and also adjacent to T Central, so it's absolutely vital for our bolding vision for our borough and what needs to be done there. So that site's laid dormant for years because of various issues, so it's great to see it in the report that will bring quality homes to our borough. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Lisa. Any others? Sarah, do you want to add something?
Sorry, yes,
No,
but I've forgotten one other point. It's probably worth just noting for Cabinet as well that there has been an announcement only a couple of days ago that there will be future brownfield funding. We're awaiting details, we're in touch with the department, and as you are aware, we're working really closely with Homes England on a strategic place partnership, which will result in a strategic prioritised housing pipeline for Tees Valley across all boroughs, that we can then collectively develop into business cases to secure funding, and having that relationship with Homes England will make that maximise the impact for the area. So there will be more funding coming, and getting that strategic pipeline in place is essential.
Yeah, we keep talking about the strategic pipeline, don't we, but we have to actually get on and do it. Given that there is going to be some significant monies coming in to be able to spend. Thanks, Sarah. Anything else to add? Okay, people are happy to... Oh, go on, Mike, do you want to say something? I was thinking, Mike's been very quiet this meeting. Not usually this quiet.
Could be louder. It's a technical question actually, in terms of the funding around the brownfield, which has not been mentioned. So there are two issues within the Tees Valley in terms of our future housing pipeline. We've got to have the pipeline first, so I agree with the Mayor on that. But so the two things are, there's something around infrastructure, which is the brownfield funding. Is there anything within the conversations with Homes England or with the funding streams that are being announced around viability gaps? Because that's the biggest risk in the Tees Valley. And I suppose it's just Cabinet having awareness about what's available around that to build into this programme.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, that is obviously fundamental to the conversation with Homes England, but in addition to that, in the development of our local growth plan, there's 3 shared priorities with central government that they're committed to working with Tees Valley on, and one of those is the viability of both commercial and housing development. So there's kind of 2 routes in there, and we've got a solid commitment from government to work with us on that. So yeah, I mean, we're awaiting detail on what funds will actually be available, but we've got that commitment there.
Okay, thanks Mike. Any others? Right, okay, if it's okay, we'll move to approve item 13 for the allocation grant for the housing fund. Great?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then on to item 14, back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. So I think it was September last year, we brought a paper to Cabinet about the Net Zero Hub. TVCA is the accountable body for the North East and Yorkshire Hub. We set out some strengthened governance in September, and we committed to bring a Cabinet report back to look at future options. A lot has happened since then nationally, and there's still some unknowns around what kind of strategic direction they're going to take. So we have set out some of that in this paper, but at the moment we're asking Cabinet to approve a further 12 months funding and MOU. So the combined authority here will retain that accountable body status for a further 12 months.
Okay, any comments or questions for Sarah on that? Seems pretty straightforward. People have to agree on 14? Excellent. Agreed. And then on to item 15. So, Jonathan?
Thanks, Graham. Thank you. I'm going to take this in 2 halves, if I can, this one, because the first one's more strategic and the second one's more detailed. So, Cabinet members will be aware that we often receive transport funding in sort of like isolated, thematic, sort of like blocks of cash that come into us. But from April 2026, so from this April, we'll now receive a single mayoral transport fund allocation, which brings together 8 different funding streams into one flexible pot, which gives the combined authority and its partners an ability to move money around between different funding streams to deliver best on its outcomes, based on a new outcomes framework that the Department for Transport has put out for us and is included in the papers. This is a really exciting new stage of delivering transport infrastructure across the Tees Valley, and one that we want to respond positively to. And in responding positively to that, we need to prepare something called a local transport delivery plan, the draft of which is due with the Department for Transport today, and the final version of which is due in September. So just really bringing members, pointing them out to paragraph 3.3, which is the table that shows the quantity of the funding available in the Mayoral Transport Fund and the nominal funding streams that that's made up from. And then in paragraph 4.14, how we've allocated that broad sort of Mayoral Transport Fund across a number of different thematic packages, which are also shown in Appendix 3. The starting point for that was the Cabinet decision in January 2024, which was allocation of a number of schemes, what was then known as CRSTS2 packages. We've assembled those into thematic packages based on the latest cost estimates for a number of those schemes, and drawn in a number of key priorities that the Cabinet has indicated during the process of the approval of the It's worth saying that in approving the submission today for the draft local transport delivery plan, What it will do, it will then further starting going on a 5-month process where we want to work up that more detailed plan for September, and that will draw on yourselves as Cabinet as to priorities, as to how that funding can be moved around between different packages and flexed around different priorities. It will draw on Transport Committee, it will draw on key officers, and it will draw on our partners as well to understand how we can best align our funding with their priorities to get the best outcomes. In particular, approving the submission of the local transport delivery plan today will also allow us to start using some of the revenue funding allocated for active travel to enable the continuation of some of the active travel hubs in an interim basis, while we look at a more long-term sustainable funding position for those active travel hubs across the Tees Valley. I think I really want to probably pause at that point, I think, Chair, and just seek questions on the sort of the general theme about the Rail Transport Fund and the local transport delivery plan, and then come back to recommendations A to E, if I can, on that.
Mr. Johnson. Alan.
Apologies, I should have really asked you this the other day, and apologies if it's been answered in other places. The feasibility studies that we did quite some time back, I know I asked the question whether or not any underspent FM feasibility studies would revert back to the Highways Department of each council. Do we know whether that is going to work out, or is that money just naturally flow back into the bigger picture?
So this is where you get the flexibility now, Alec, within that. So any underspend on some of those schemes or any allocations that we've got for those feasibility studies in the programme then are part of the overall pot, and we'd be looking for Cabinet to guide us on what you want to do that, so whether that might be increased highway maintenance funding or other capital funding for transport across the... That's the beauty now of the flexibility you've got on the Rail Transport Fund.
Okay, and will we get the devil in the detail in terms of how much was underspent on each feasibility study?
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you.
I like the language of reverting back.
Well, you know what I'm like.
I like it. I like it. Chris.
If we're going to revert money that's been inspecting bridges, Christ, I might be in for a good day. I'm just questioning about when we get to a point of actually knowing which projects should really be looked at and what order that we do it in, because, Darlington Link Road, if it's one of the largest projects in there, and if it comes back that the fees are too high, then we should really be taking that in conjunction with the rest of the scheme and really understanding the impact of that. I'm also just curious if by September will we be able to measure, or at least start to in some way work out which of the local transport outcomes framework that each of the project hits against, and is that what's coming in September in its entirety? Or will it be only some of the schemes that will be at that point?
We will have to set out in September, Chris, as part of this final local transport delivery plan submission, a firmer programme for those 5 years on spend. So a number of the schemes in there will need to do some more detailed work on and kick the tyres on some of that. And that the A186 connectivity scheme that you picked up is one of those. And at the same time, set out to government what we think that package is going to deliver in terms of the outcomes and the outcomes framework that we've set. So yes, the answer to your question is, and that's why I think we would look in the early stages post this initial submission to seek a real session with Cabinet and the Transport Committee about what your priorities are around that flexibility. But for the first time, we have got flexibility between those different funding streams. So, if say, active travel, highway maintenance, all sort of priorities for all of you around the table is something you want to prioritise, we can now do this, sort of, Did that
answer the question, Chris?
Yeah, it did. It'd be really good if we could get some sight of that before, really in advance, before it comes anywhere near. Yeah, it does. And I just wonder if we can get one of the outcome frameworks changed to how much people love a bridge.
I think there's a serious point there, Chris, about that actually the DFT's outcomes framework is not actually a set of outcomes. It's a lot of it's a set of outputs. Yeah. And we've got our strategic conversation, which is our annual discussion with the Department for Transport in early May, and we want to push back quite a lot on some of those outputs because we think they're quite formulaic. and actually what we're after outcomes about people's lives and opportunities and all of those sort of things. So we will take your suggested outcome to that framework and push it back towards the department, definitely.
I think it's also worth recognising that the Department for Transport are still very keen to micromanage process as well. So Jonathan's right to say there is flexibility, but the oversight and input and agreement from DFT is still significant. And just to say that's not unique to us. I was in Bristol yesterday with all of the other mayors, and where you have places like Manchester that are about to just sign off their integrated settlement, which is supposed to give them a lot more flexibility. They're very frustrated that actually it's not as flexible as they would like, and they actually name-checked DFT being the most difficult on trying to maintain complete control over that. So again, not to put a damper on this, but yes, there's flexibility, yes, we need to put our prioritisation, yes, Jonathan's absolutely right. With some of the money, it's relatively straightforward to be able to reprioritise depending on what we want to do. But it's also not carte blanche that, I mean, even in September, for example, some of the larger schemes are what are called retained schemes. So even if we go through that process and we're happy with our prioritisation exercise, it actually still needs approval from the department to say whether they're happy with it or not. And if they're not, well, then we have to go and revisit our priorities. So unless they agree with our priorities, it's still a bit of a process. But to be fair, Jonathan and the team have been managing that well. And from I suppose from a TVCA point of view, DFT have been pretty good with us. I think certainly compared to some of the other combined authorities who are approaching it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, just I think I'll add to that one as well, Ben, that it is what they're focusing on is delivery, and I think it goes back to your point there, Chris, is that when we move between March and September, we'll be really concentrating on which of these sort of projects, interventions can we deliver, and going, progressing those with some pace, really, I think, because delivery is the key thing, because delivery is what the department's looking for, the outcomes they're looking for as well, and delivery will then hopefully lead to more freedoms, flexibilities in that next round of 5-year funding settlements as well.
So Tom, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think as well, Jonathan and I have been talking about how we use this money to leverage in more money, both privately and public. So things like the T Central project, we absolutely need to use this transport money to try and leverage private investment, but also we've worked really hard in terms of other competitive funding pots. So the transport team have done a sterling job in terms of, for example, the zero emission buses. So we've gone in 3 years from having no zero emission buses in the Tees Valley to probably going to be about 2/3 of the whole fleet, isn't it, Alan? And we haven't spent a penny on that. That's been bids into government and working with the operators. So we're not resting on our laurels with this devolved money. We're going to work really hard to leverage in, as I say, more public and private investment off the back of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll come to Alan first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. People of a certain age, Chris, will remember how we use their pet and their plans for certain bridges, but never, sorry. Just for clarity, I know we're doing this in 2 parts, but just for clarity, because I do have a couple of my vocal councillors in the public gallery, particularly vocal, one of them. Passionate. Passionate. What we've already got in the Tier 1 listed in the same report is already the priorities of the Transport Committee and myself as leader, just to sort of tighten up the language we're using, because we're talking about flexibilities, but just to clarify, the priorities are already in the report.
Yeah, thanks. I'll come on to the second bit.
We'll come back to the fact that it was handled and
yeah, I mean, it's really good news that 2/3 of the fleet are now not going to create lots of emissions, and I know that you said that was money from central government, so I think we just should put a mark down on how great the current government is for everyone. And a second mark, I suppose, just on Jonathan's point, I do welcome the comments you made, John, about the next sort of 4 or 5 months will be about working with Cabinet, and I suppose it's a little plea to make sure that engagement goes to the next tier as well. I know you mentioned the Transport Committee, but I know that I've got a couple of committee chairs that would be particularly keen to be involved in those discussions, and I'm sure there are portfolio holders in other local authorities. But the marker, I suppose, is around highways, the highways maintenance. I know it's an indicative allocation, but there isn't any provision in there for an uplift on future years. So I know we've had this conversation, but just to put a public marker down, that I think that's something that within that flexibility that you talked about, that's something that we should look at, because those costs ain't going down, they're on the way up. And I think your comments about pace, I think Tees Valley as a whole is looking for that delivery at that pace, and I'm always saying the words brevity and purpose. I think that's how that mantra of how we move forward needs to be across lots of different things. And I know we've had conversations about that outside, and I couldn't comment on some of the other items, but that's certainly the approach that we're taking in relation to other items as well, to give people reassurance on that front.
Thanks, Lisa?
Is it already on? Yeah, I'm sure you won't be surprised I'm going to mention active hubs and travel, Jonathan. So just a couple of questions first and then a comment. Why is the active hub funding being reduced, and also why was the calculation to us reduced on that?
So the active travel hub, the active travel revenue allocation that's shown in the table, Lisa, was reduced because our active travel capability rating was downgraded in the last assessment. A bit going back to what Chris said about outcomes and outputs, Active Travel England have quite a hard-nosed way of looking at how capability is done, and that's in terms of delivery and length of active travel facilities provided across the Tees Valley. So because we've removed some active travel facilities, and because we haven't been as quick as we could have been at delivering other active travel facilities, our capability rating went down, and therefore that funding came down.
Okay, and then just some commentary. So I really welcome the input from TVCA this week on my concerns about the active travel hub in Stockton. Speak from the heart on this one. Like during COVID, I bought myself, I call it my Mary Poppins bike, that should have been using lately with my dog in the basket, I think, whilst I haven't had any transport. But used the hub many times. I know over 200 cycles are stored in there every week. Showering facilities, security in there, bike maintenance. We were at a meeting last week in Preston Hall and watched them go past with a range of people on. And to me, I know in an email it said it was inconsistent, and I accept that. But I think each hub you've got to look at the own merits of every hub and the feasibility of those remaining open. And just a heartfelt plea to you, for consultation and analysis on each individual hub, how they perform, what they do, and also how are they used by the public and how are they felt of. And I know that you'll say that you will do that, but I would just really plead for you to speak to local councillors, to local users of that hub, and see what the need is there. And with that analysis and with the consultation, I'd be more than happy to take some recommendations, but I'm not sure that those have been done. Thank you.
I'll come in these because it's unfair on Jonathan, because this obviously predates him. So apologies that we should have brought this to Cabinet earlier. So obviously we've listened now and acted, so apologies for that. And Jonathan and I will work really closely now with Cabinet as we do that review. But this short-term intervention now buys us the time so the hubs can stay in place while we work up with Cabinet what the future looks like.
And I think, I just reiterate that we want to work with all of you about the type of hub and where that hub is as well, because relocating some of the hubs may be better for overall plans and things like that, within some of the bigger transport schemes as well. And I know we've spoken, Lisa, again about relocating as part of T Central and things like that. So all of those sort of things we'll talk about in the next few months. So we get a really long-term sustainable position for these hubs, and the encouragement for active travel, which will hopefully get our capability rating back up again. And
just would welcome that engagement. Thank you.
Absolutely committed to do that.
Alec?
Direct question, Tom. Why wasn't the Cabinet included, and we had that conversation earlier? I know it was actually a member of, it was somebody that stopped me in Saltburn. That's how I became aware. Then I messaged Ben, and Ben kindly sort of give me the full answer. But why wasn't that brought to
So there's been conversation with officers, Alec, but I'll take it on the chin. We should have brought it to Cabinet earlier. So apologies for that. Obviously we've acted on that, and now we've extended them, and now Jonathan and I are committed to work with you now to make sure that we get a plan going forward that everyone is comfortable with and agrees with.
I'm certainly not firing a bullet here. I'm saying we've gone to great lengths, as we've already said, with the improvement board to avoid sort of this, and it's just this seems to have slipped through the somehow.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to come in, Alan. There's absolutely been conversations with officers, but I'll take that on the chin. We should have had a conversation with Cabinet sooner.
Sorry, Alan, are you going to come back? Just one.
I'll use my loud voice if that's all right. Yeah, I think, like Tom said, we've been working with officers this. Apology, I think the challenge from a funding perspective has been the timing of all this change with Mayoral Transport Fund, and obviously needing this decision today to make that kind of allocation and a contract naturally coming to an end, and how we kind of continue on. So obviously subject to the agreement to the MTF, that creates the ability for us then to, and subject to agreement of the delegations, creates the opportunities to use that funding to put that as extensions in place. So that kind of addresses that, if that's okay.
If I may, Chair, I think the thing that concerns me is not the actual outcome of conversation we have now, but why would we downgrade it? Is that a reflection on the local authorities not delivering the active travel projects fast enough, or?
I mean, I think tell me if I'm wrong, but I'll be speaking out of turn, but my understanding is one of the reasons is the money we've already allocated to active travel and cycling infrastructure, etc., hasn't been delivered as quickly as active travel would have liked us to, and yes, that's done in partnership with local authorities, and there are reasons for delays, right? I mean, if we just take the Gisborne and Unthorpe route, the Pitchenthorpe route, which I get hassled on a daily basis, we all know there are reasons why that happens, it's nobody's fault there. So that's an issue. And then the other thing that absolutely played into that was the removal of the Lindorf cycleway. And Active Travel England were not happy that we took the decision to remove that cycle lane. And that was part of the consideration as well. So I think that's what Jonathan was referring to as removing some of the infrastructure and being slower than they would like us on the deployment of some infrastructure.
This is the dichotomy, if you like, Alex, because basically Active Travel England are saying their parameters are, have you delivered schemes and have you increased the length of active travel facilities in terms of kilometres of length. Actually, the outcomes we should be looking for, and I think Lisa articulated this, are we getting more people using active travel? Are we getting healthier communities? That isn't looked at by Active Travel when they do that. So we need to push that as part of our overall framework, not just length of cycle lanes, which is what Active Travel is.
Surely there's a level of degree of discretion, though, if a project's been unwholly popular with an area, surely
not with ACE, not with ACE. And in terms of how they rate the capability rating, no. And I think this goes back to Chris's point, is that we should be, when we set out our outcomes framework as part of what we're trying to do with the overall fund, we should be saying this is what works for the Tees Valley, and these are outcomes in terms of healthier communities, not outputs, as in lengths of cycle lane. And I think that's because the default will be length of cycle lane and number of cycle facilities you've put in.
There are lots of people keen to come in. Alan's desperate to come in, and I'm coming to Lisa and Stephen.
Yeah, I think the point as well, I would say, is it's also a timing point. So at the moment there are 2 schemes that are in business case process for approval. This assessment was done 3 months ago or so. If it had been 3 months on, it might have been a different position because that progress has happened. It's just that unfortunate timing that we've kind of done that, but it's good news that we will be hopefully issuing 2 funding agreements in the next few days to get 2 of those schemes underway, so we'll be showing that continual kind of progress.
Absolutely. Lisa?
Yeah, make no apologies for that, Chair. What I'm frustrated by on this is Alex made the point that Cabinet were incited on this, and while I understand that, why weren't any of the working groups, Transport Committee, my Deputy Leader sits on the Transport Committee. I found this out on social media, and I went to my rep on the Transport Committee, Paul Rowling, who was the Deputy Leader, had no knowledge of that. I then started at director level. Nothing, no audit trail here about when there's been any engagement with officers. And I went down the chain because I thought, if they're not fed it up, and I cannot find anything where any officer has been briefed on this or consulted on this. So I would really love, if we're going to say that there's been some engagement with officers, and my officers telling me different, is what I'd like to know.
So I accept, Lisa, we haven't had a conversation with Cabinet, I absolutely accept that. There has been conversation with officers at Stockton and officers in all the authorities, but I'm taking it on the chin, we should have had a conversation with Cabinet.
Can you give me some evidence of that with officers, so that I can go back to my officers?
Do we have that? Is that right? After the meeting, Alan and the team will come back to you as to who they spoke to. That's not a problem, Lisa. I'm going to come to Stephen first, because Stephen's very, very patient.
Thank you. Just picking up on what something Jonathan said in terms of introduction and I think there's a contradiction, not in what Jonathan said, but, contradicting what he said, but it's not him being contradictory, so to me. See, you talked about the Mail Transport Fund being a single pot of money that we can then determine ourselves how we use, which is something that the new government's done. It's very helpful because it's what they're doing with local government. I think there's far more flexibility about decision making. So 2 questions. In the table in 3.3 in the report, where there's a breakdown of the funding across the next few years and then separated out into different streams. I think you used the phrase that it's nominal amounts. I'm not clear whether that's a nominal amount that government said this is what we think we should be doing, or whether it's TBC's assessment of what nominal means. Because I think we potentially should at times make decisions about actually pushing flex some of these budgets to be helpful, particularly when some of them are huge and some of them are tiny. Some small changes that could be made, particularly in active travel, for example, could make significant changes for active travel versus what is frankly small change for what some of the more significant rail and road infrastructures. And the further point that's come out from the discussion this morning, which is where the contradiction is that if we're being given this flexibility, if we're now being effectively told off by government over the active travel, that would suggest that there isn't flexibility there. So could you say a bit more about, particularly on that line about active travel, if we're effectively being told there is a cap on what we can spend, even if we're being told in the entirety of the budget, it's up to us how we allocate it across those different streams.
So the table in 3.3, Steve, is how the totality of the Mayoral Transport Fund has been arrived at. So if those were to come in the traditional way of each individual stream coming, that was what it would be. And that's where that active travel revenue comes in as well.
And you're saying that's what government said to us, that's how this...
Yes, that's how the totality of the pot comes together, sort of thing. So if in a traditional way we were to get all of these streams separately and have to spend them separately, that is what you would get. We have got flexibility then within the totality of those numbers between both capital and revenue, because there's capital and revenue lines in there, and that is the discussion we want to have then with Cabinet, with Transport Committee, with key officers, with portfolio holders between now and September to see how we collectively would want to flex those money to deliver the priorities that we want to. So, if say Cabinet wanted to raise index-linked hire maintenance, that would be something we could do. If they wanted to move more capital into active travel to accelerate the delivery of that active travel schemes, absolutely could do that. That is a starting point from what government is saying gives you the totality of the pot. The flexibility now is within us about our priorities. Go back to what Chris said then, a link to an outcomes framework we'll be putting back as part of September. But also, again, I would say linked to absolute delivery, because delivery and certainty of delivery and pace of delivery is really, really important. So when we look at not just how we flex between the roads, I think how we look at flex between the years will be important as well. And there'll be some opportunity, and I'm keen to, over-programming as well is allowed, and you'll note in the paper we're suggesting over-programming level of about 25%, because there may well be schemes in years 3 and 4 we don't know about yet, but opportunities to co-invest with the private sector, opportunities from our side to keep looking at the area. So we should allocate that as well to be able to be flexible, rather than being quite rigid, because rigidity, now we've got flexibility, we should use that flexibility. Rigidity gives you, it leads you to delays, not delivering, and then all the things we've just talked about.
But specifically on the active travel,
yes.
do we think the cap because of...
No, there's no cap. No cap.
But the cap, so you did say one of the issues was we've been assessed by active travel.
Yeah. So that has given the revenue line there, the 3 years of revenue has come from the capability rating, and that has fed through to that.
I think what Stephen might be alluding to, sorry Stephen, is that that's currently in the line, but if there was additional revenue within the transport budget, the Cabinet chose to prioritise to increase that active travel budget, is that possible? Is that what you're trying to get at, Stephen?
So you're saying we've been given less money in that category?
Yes.
We could still spend more if we choose.
But the Cabinet could spend more if they choose to on that revenue, yes, absolutely.
But we've only allocated active travel money from Active Travel England, and so we've downgraded it accordingly at the moment until the prioritisation exercise takes.
So that prioritisation, we're going to enter between now and September, your prioritisation.
Finally, just thanks for Tom for taking it on the chin, because I've been getting earache for the whole fortnight about science clubs.
Chris?
Sorry.
So just something on the flexibility or lack thereof. So for me, I think, I'm going to struggle believe I'm going to say this, I think cycling's a good thing when it's done well, but I think there's an inflexibility sometimes. So Green Lane, for example, is one of the schemes currently going through, and the closure of Factory Grove, if that is still in there when that scheme comes forward, I will not condone in any way that scheme happening. And it feels like there's weird hills that get picked to down on, whereas actually if there was just a bit of flexibility, we can mitigate that issue. Residents will feel happy about it. They won't feel like something's being imposed upon them and everyone has to be cycling everywhere and we'll try to get rid of cars, because that's not what's happening. But I think the problem is it doesn't feel like much. It feels like we know what's happening. There is no evidence. I think that's what needs to
That was meant to be easy.
I was going to say, but are you selling a bridge, Chris? That's what I was any other questions on the first bit?
What would that subsidy need to be to keep the actual travel as is, so to maintain?
So the current run rate of the current facilities is about £50,000 a month.
Okay, so from that 700 grand, what's the shortfall in terms of needing that review? So downgraded.
So what we've done, Alex said that some of the people working in those hubs have already got alternative jobs, sort of things. So that's fine. So it's about £33,000 a month at the moment in the interim period, sort of things. So that's our run rate of £33,000 a month.
I think, as Alex saying, what would given the downgraded money that we've got, what would the top up require to be to keep things as is?
I think that would come back down to, well, are we keeping the same as at the moment, or are we looking for different premises? Are we looking for a different way of delivering the service? That's what we want to do over the next 3 months, is work with you to review how best to deliver the service in each of the areas.
Okay.
So if you were to keep the existing facilities going for the next 3 years, the shortfall it's probably about £600,000 a year. So the shortfall would be about £1 million of revenue, based on what we've got. But we think there's better ways to deliver these services and more opportunity to work collaboratively with other schemes on there. So if we're opening up other schemes, we can do the hubs in a slightly different way.
I mean, the long and short of it is within Cabinet's gift to decide what is being delivered, where and how, whether that's as is or different. And that process has to take place now. We've managed to get a little bit of breathing space, albeit it hasn't been ideal, to work on the new plan. So I think is the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was
That's easy.
that was the easy bit, yeah, because we're going to talk about bosses now. That was the easy bit. I think just we'll come back to it at the end, but that covers recommendations A to E, and I think recommendation D is the key one to go away with from today. Is that we will work with Cabinet and colleagues and any portfolio holders about what those priorities are going to be from this point forward, because we think we want to be guided by you about how we reflect this money. Okay, one of the things that the Mayoral Transport Fund has given us for the first time in quite a while is longer term certainty on bus funding and for the bus service improvement plan. So one of the lines in 3.3, Stephen, was the bus service improvement plan funding going forward, and particularly how we use this. And Cabinet delegated to the Transport Committee a review of existing support services and to come back with recommendations as to how best to use some of that funding in terms of taking forward supported services and a range of bus improvements going further forward. So what Transport Committee have done, working with all of the officers at the Tees Valley Combined Authority and around the local authorities, is essentially come up with a broad indication on paragraph 6.4 of how to use the nominal mayoral transport fund allocation across a different range of themes around bus service improvement plan over the course of the next 3 years. So that includes continuing under 2022 fares offers, care leaver fares offers, sort of transport safety partnership, bit of monetary evaluation and contingency, but giving about 50% of the funding towards a sustainable network for the future. So expanding the Tees Valley's bus network and meaning more people can get access to bus services. Due to that nominal allocation, we have done a review of the bus network across the Tees Valley and the supported services, and taken on board a lot of recommendations and requests to look at potential services. And as part of the appendix that you'll see at the back, Appendix 4, we have allocated a lot of those services into a number of different tiers, Tier 1, Tier 1.2, Tier 2, 3 and 4, depending on their criteria. And we are recommending to Cabinet that we go forward and procure contracts for Tier 1, Tier 1.1 and Tier 2 services, because we think, based on our estimated costs of those, they are affordable. If we find that actually those contracts come up less than we think, and there's further funding available within the nominal BSIC allocation, or to a point we said before, Cabinet allocate more money than we've currently working with to bus services, we will then go into Tier 3 as well and look what we can deliver in Tier 3. But this is a really, really good news, because for the first time it really gives us an expanded bus network across the Tees Valley. And you'll see at paragraph 6.29 some of the parameters here about a net increase in supported bus services. So this is essentially Cabinet using its devolved funding to give more people access to bus services across the Tees Valley for a longer period of time.
Well, thank you. Can I go on record and thank Steve Arker? I know you've put a lot of work in. My own lead member, Cal Quartermain, the East Cleveland councillors as well. My question will be, is Stagecoach and Arriva already had sight of these Tier 1 and Tier 2 routes, and are they completely on board in delivering what we're willing to pay for?
Yeah.
No matter the subsidy per passenger? That's not going to come back at another, say, the same time next year, because over the last couple of years, haven't we been in this awful position where we're having to agree the subsidy every year, and it's like taking from Peter to pay Paul. And does this, with the way we've devolved and using this pot now, does that avoid that in the future?
So we're trying to let these on a multi-year contract, Alec,
yeah,
for the next 2 or 3 years, yeah.
Any questions for Jonathan on the second half? Steve, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, it's just, well, thank you, Alec, for your comments, but also I just want to thank Alan and Emily. It's clearly very complicated. It needs to talk to an awful lot of people with an awful lot of options, and we can't all have everything that we want. So there's always a huge amount of compromise. So I know TC officers have spent a long time talking to local authorities to try and tease out what is collectively the best solution. So, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, it was very remiss of me not to acknowledge it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted, I suppose, just to put on record, really. I think, along with all of the leaders and possibly yourself, Chair, received a number of emails from concerned residents from East Cleveland. I think that my last count was 220 odd, I think, of those emails. And I don't want those people to think that they weren't received, they weren't looked at. And I know that those who've been heavily involved will be taking account of those. I think it's very much, as Councillor Harker said, that not everybody gets everything they want. In my own case, I imagined that the cessation of Tees Flex and a replacement with an hourly service 6 days a week would actually have been greeted with a lot of positivity, but seemingly not the case. So I just wanted, I suppose, just to make sure that was on public record, that those emails had been received, and I know we've all responded to those in one way or another, because it does take a lot of time for those residents to do that, and that is democracy, and I thank them for their emails that they sent.
I think them 200 people, as the councillors in the public gallery will adhere to, didn't realise that the hourly services that were going to be improved today, so it will be very much welcomed in replacement of the Tees Flex, I can tell you that. And my poor PAs individually replied to every single one of them with my words, but she's done the work. But yeah, I think all of our inboxes, including yours, Ben, I know has been particularly busy by a certain Luke Meyer MP, but he's fighting for his constituents.
That was the frustrating thing, that, you know, it was clear in the papers that I think the way that Luke communicated that has probably caused a little bit of concern in the public that was unnecessary, given the recommendations that were put forward. But I'm glad we're all communicating back to our residents to clear up the matter, which is the most important thing, right? They care about vet bus services. Assuming we approve it, that is, but I'm getting the sense of direction of travel here. Chris?
And then Chris speaks. So, I'm just
cancel the buses.
There's a list of Tier 1, Tier 2s, and that list is quite outlined and quite definitive. Is it a case that actually the Tier 3 or 4, where are they listed? Like, which paragraph are they listed in? Or how do we know? If we manage to succeed and get all of this, how do we know what the potential options are for the next stage?
Okay, so once we've let the contracts for the Tier 1 and Tier 2, so we've got definitive numbers for those as well. So the table you've got there, I think it's table, paragraph 6.23 has got the estimated numbers there as well. Once we've got a firmed up number for that, in the next sort of couple of months or so, this goes alongside your discussion with, about where you want to prioritise. Because obviously, this is based on back to Steve's point, the numbers in the table at 3.3, the indicative numbers. If Cabinet decide they want to do more with buses and go beyond this as well, and we've got the numbers and there's funding available, we'll come back to the Tier 3 list, right, with you and with your officers and say, okay, which ones of the Tier 3 do we want to fund through what's remaining there as well?
Okay, so just so...
Tier 3, just generally, Tier 3 was generally enhancements to existing services in terms of sort of evenings and Sundays.
Yeah.
So it wasn't new connections, this was more sort of enhanced frequencies.
I'm just curious because Hartlepool in the current Tier 1, I don't know why I find Hartlepool's good.
Because you have wisdom between your ears.
They currently only have 3 services listed in that, and for the Tier 3 and Tier 4 they actually have 11 listed. And I just wonder where's the element of political choice that, while the decision might not be sensible for the Tier 3, there needs to be an element of choice and oversight, so actually we know that even though one of the Tier 3s might have been sensible, that we at least have the option to consider it, and I just wonder where that piece of work happened.
So that piece of work happened within the Transport Committee and within clear officers.
Sorry, Jonathan, I might be misremembering this, but the long list came to a previous Cabinet. That included everything, and then we agreed that what we wanted was a recommendation from the Transport Committee. They then went through that, but there's also helped us lead to
and I think and the criteria that was set, Chris, was that we wanted to extend the network. So that's where Tier 2 went to, that enhanced connectivity. We felt, and the Transport Committee's recommendation was, it was better to give more people access to bus services rather than concentrate on increased frequency of existing services at this point, which is where, in terms of Hartlepool, there's a bit of focus on that, those new connections, which we feel is important. Tier 3 then is generally existing connections, just enhanced frequency, particularly on weekends. But what we've got now is we've got a bigger bus, assuming this is approved, we now will have a larger bus network covering a greater area of the Tees Valley and giving more people access to bus services than we had before. And we felt, and the Transport Committee's recommendation to you is that was the way to go at this moment in time. Notwithstanding, if you prioritise more funding to buses in this next 5-year period, then we can go back to Tier 3.
Any other questions? Okay, so even though it's been split down explanation-wise by Jonathan into 2, are people happy to agree all of the recommendations in item 15? Yep. Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Well done, Jonathan, and to the team, Alan. Thank you for all your work. And then moving on to item 16, procurement commercial strategy. Who's picking this up? Is it Jersey?
Thank you, Chair. So the Command Authority did have a procurement strategy. It was a little bit outdated, and since that strategy was written, we've had the changes to the Procurement Act. The Procurement Act, as you probably know from your own local authorities, it's been placing a lot more emphasis on transparency, integrity, and maximising public benefits. So those are the key sort of, I suppose, outcomes that's to be achieved from changing the Procurement Act. Obviously, if we've got a procurement strategy and there's a major change in the Procurement Act, it is, I think, I can't remember the date, but it is one of the most significant changes to the Procurement Act in recent years. One of the things it allows for now is this sort of complex, competitive, flexible procedure. So for the first time, you can do negotiation through the procurement approach, and it allows you to tailor it more to local needs, local market, local suppliers. So that's a really positive thing. And there is definitely an emphasis when there used to be another acronym called MEET that used to assess suppliers, but now it's more about the sort of quality, the social value side of things. So that's a big emphasis, and as you probably know as well through your own local authorities, a lot of corporate private sector entities now have what's called CSR, or corporate social responsibility policy. So one of the things that I think is going to be really important is for the combined authority to be looking when they're working with some major suppliers or smaller suppliers across the region, also have to be major. I know quite a few smaller suppliers that also have a CSR. But it's going to be really important going forward that's one of the aims from the Act is that we respond to that and we do get the maximum benefit here in terms of social value in this region. So that's predominantly the reason for the strategy. You'll see in there's 4 pillars in there. We talk about best practice, embedding social value. These are not just words. Behind these things, we are going to have clear action. We've already got some, but we're going to have more detailed action plans to deliver all these pillars. So it's not just a sort of tick box exercise. This is going to be something that's really genuine. And I know Mandy, who is our kind of acting head of procurement, she's really, really passionate behind this. We've had an organisation which I think you're probably all familiar with called NEPO, who's been assisting us. They've been absolutely fabulous. We've had one of their colleagues has been supporting Mandy, looking at how we do things here in terms of procurement, looking at the team, the structure. Between me and them, we've batted around the procurement strategy because I wanted to make sure it's fit for purpose and relevant for the combined authority, and hopefully we've managed to achieve that. So, yeah, hopefully this is something now that just refreshes the procurement strategy that was already there, but also builds on that. Making sure we're compliant with the Procurement Act, but also making sure this social value and the local markets and local suppliers, we're accessing those and helping us as much as possible. I might start taking any questions, but I might have to take detailed procurement questions away.
Yeah. So any comments or questions? Pam?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I welcome it. I think it's a really good piece of work. In Hartlepool, we've been looking at our own procurement. We've been working with NEPO and we've been working really closely with them in terms of the social value stuff. We're developing that internally. It is an area that's close to my heart. I think one of just a couple of things though on the strategy. There seems to be a level that sort of contracts above 100,000. Now I appreciate that on the Tees Valley wide we're dealing with big sums of money, but I think it would be really good to potentially just give some consideration to things that are below that 100k. I just think there are lots of SMEs in the Tees Valley area, and I'm one of them, and I do believe that everybody can do something. It might not necessarily be that you can give numerous apprenticeship opportunities or numerous work experience opportunities, but you can, every business, and I'm sure Matthew would support that, can do something. So just maybe if we could reflect on the under 100k. And the other thing was just to say that I think as constituent local authorities, is there something in terms of bringing those almost working together as constituent local authorities with TDCA, and that, I don't mean to make that onerous, but I mean in terms of maybe sharing good practice or sharing those principles so that we ensure that, making sure that our local organisations are in the best place to benefit from the opportunities, and I include the VCS in the VCSE in that as well as local businesses. But doing that together, so I don't know whether that's a couple of times a year or just a session. I don't know what that looks like. But
no, I think it's a really good idea. I mean, the strategy I think does refer to that partnership work, and it refers to NEPO and trying to use those with consortiums or work in partnership. But I think, yeah, absolutely. I'll feed that back to Mandy. I think that's a really good idea.
Because just one further point on NEPO, and I'm sure colleagues around the table know this, but actually there is a financial incentive for local authorities to use that process rather than other processes, and that's about us just being sensible with our own investment. It circulates the money back into local authorities, so why would we not want to use that process?
Chris?
Sorry, people are going to stop putting my name on stuff at this point. So firstly, I think Pam's right. I think there should be something that we do about sharing supplier experiences, which is something that we discussed this morning separately. I think there probably needs to be an AI policy for the organisation as a whole, because actually there's a lot of talk about the use of AI, but actually how are we mitigating effects and what are we doing about human-controlled decision-making and all those other elements. We've got this visual strategy, but it's quite outward-facing rather than how the authority uses technology itself. On page 20, there is a success measure against increased local supply participation, which says by X% in 2 years, and it says to look at historic data trend and put in place a stretch target. So I want to know when that target's coming and what that will be. Are we using anyone or are we using any tools to measure social value, and if so, is there a chance that Cabinet can have access to view-only dashboards or to be able to see that? And can we have that as a further update as well?
So to come back on that, yeah, absolutely fantastic questions, because relevant, and probably what I should have said as well, is that in terms of the sort of the procurement dashboard and the things we're doing. So first of all, yeah, there's definitely going to be a detailed action plan. And within that detailed action plan, there's going to be absolutely how we're going to measure the success of these things. Absolutely, so we can measure our performance against that. One of the things that Mandy's working on, and it kind of links to the AI pillar and the AI theme, is we want a dashboard, we want a procurement dashboard. We want it for exec team purposes as well, so we want a regular quarterly dashboard, tell us how we're doing, some basic stuff in there, but we want that to come in. So we're working on an interactive dashboard that will be live and be able to refresh really quickly. One of those things in there is going to be that measurement of social value. So that's why I said it's not just in there as words, this is something we're really going to monitor. And also, as part of the work that NEPO has been doing, is working around as well about our structures and our processes and that. And in terms of the structure and the budget, we do put some growth in the budget, and part of that is for some increasing staffing into procurement, because it's a very lean team. And one of those is we are going to have a social value officer that is really going to be sitting with my colleagues here and others to actually, as we go at that contract, that early stage, and we're looking at the contract specifications, etc., how we build into our tenders and our specifications that social value thing. So that's a really positive thing, I think.
Can I just come in on that point, Chair?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of speaking to my earlier point, that actually if you're looking at developing that, and local authorities are equally looking at how we're measuring and how we're doing it, it makes sense for us to be doing that together instead of creating 6 different systems. We create one, and then we work together, and that's about true economies of scale, isn't it? So
I think that's why I've been really keen. It was actually very limited for. She actually recommended them because she worked and you could see the benefits that they bring, and I think that's why we're close to keep out. We're keen to keep our close working with them, because they have got that bird's eye view of what everybody's doing. So we're definitely having those conversations with them.
I mean, if we're ultimately set the strategy here, by definition, any funding that we give, never mind projects that we're delivering, have to follow our procurement strategy, and that includes the local authorities that we give funding to. So it would be odd if we had different strategies, because any funding we give to a local authority would have to meet TVCA strategy, which might conflict. So if there isn't a single approach to it, it doesn't make sense. And I just wanted to raise one point, because it's something that's come up quite a lot in recent months. But it also came up again on Wednesday night when I was doing my mayoral question time in Darlington, around our procurement rules on following the law, in particular around how do we make sure the funding given complies with the new Supreme Court ruling on single-sex spaces. And I remember many months ago we had a complaint about the Hartlepool Folk Festival, which we basically told them we would pull the funding from if they didn't make sure they were complying with the Supreme Court ruling, which they did, thankfully, because it was ahead of schedule. There was a subsequent event that I wasn't aware of again, without getting into too much detail, was delegated funding through one of the local authorities that then also seems to have happened and not complied with the Supreme Court ruling. So I personally want to make sure that that is included in our procurement strategy, that we have safe spaces for women, single-sex spaces, and we comply with the Supreme Court ruling. So in approving this strategy, I want that included as part of the approval. But again, that is actually a really interesting example of where, how does that interact with the local authorities? And if we have that in a strategy, but let's say, politics is politics, right? You know, other local authorities take a different approach to it, but they, you know, or even a third-party organisation doesn't have, it's like, how do we manage that and go through those approvals? That's a very specific example, but it's how that we have to align on that policy for it to work. Because you can very easily see lots of our money, which it does, go through into local authorities to deliver projects, but there's conflict there, and that is then going to cause a problem for the delivery of those projects and meeting our procurement strategy.
Yeah, and we're absolutely, I mean, we're working closely with the directors that deliver frontline services, but also we've got a things risk assurance team, and monitoring some of these things. So we're looking at all the processes and how we're working together.
Yeah, it's more just a point to note that as we approve this strategy, that work has to be done, because I could easily see this being sat in through the staff and we've approved the strategy. Nothing hugely has been done with it, and we haven't actually engaged properly with the local authorities, and the local authorities haven't actually engaged properly with TVCA to figure out what this looks like in practice. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so just on my point though, with the active recognition of the requirement and the need to comply with the law and the Supreme Court ruling, that people, as an addition to what was in the strategy, just to make it explicit, because people should just be complying with the law, that people have to agree with the strategy.
Yeah.
Yep.
With that recommendation that we work with local authorities.
Yes,
absolutely, of course. Yeah. Okay, agreed. Well, I think that's it, with 10 minutes to spare. So,
I don't know whether you want to just read your message sent me a while ago.
You sent me a message a while ago.
What do you want him to say?
Over there, chair. Turn it on.
Then ignore that.
So, we've finished the meeting.
Matter for the minutes.
Ignore the message.
People
because I'm at the
enjoy
next
your
meeting.
weekend.
I'm at the next meeting. I'm at the next
Pam
Sorry.
said, Denise may or may not be at the next meeting. But on the chance that Denise might be doing something more productive and be at the next meeting, this could be...
So does the salesman self-reference?
I'll be here.
You're going to be here at the next
I'll
meeting.
be here, sorry.
We're putting that on record, that you're definitely going to be here at the next
It's
meeting.
my very last meeting as a local.
Is it? Oh, yeah, that's
The next one.
We'll do that. Right, have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks for your time.